How's it going there? My name is Thomas Brush. I'm the creator of a game called Pinstripe. Also about to finish a game called Once Upon a Coma and launch that in a month on Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PS4, pretty much every other platform you can think of. Click the link in the description if you want to wishlist that game. Also, you can support on Patreon. That would really mean a lot to me. Help me make videos. Alright guys, a lot of us want to make 2D games and create 2D characters, a character that stands out. But I can't tell you how many times I've created a 2D character, and maybe you can sympathize with me, created a 2D character that just looks like junk, or maybe it looks amazing when it's like this big, but when it's that big, it looks like crap. Well, I'm going to show you how you can make a character, a 2D character, look amazing when he's this big or this big. There's a lot of principles, graphic design principles, specifically design principles used with logos. And I was actually a graphic designer for 3 years, a graphic designer and a web developer for 3 years. So I've used a lot of those principles. So what we're going to do today, you're going to love it, I promise. We're going to take Link from Breath of the Wild and we're going to make him into a 2D character, something you might use in a platformer. So let's go ahead and get started. Now before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, Hostinger. If you've ever thought about creating a website or hosting a game on a server, I'd highly recommend Hostinger. They're really fast, they're easy to use, highly affordable, and you can click the link in the description for 15% off to see just how affordable and amazing they are. Oh, and there's a website builder to make things really easy for you guys. Trust me, I used to be a web developer. There's a reason why I used to be a web developer. It's because being a web developer is really tough. Creating websites from scratch is tough. You guys don't need to do that. You got to make games or play Minecraft or whatever. So use their really efficient, amazing, professional looking website builder tool. Now, for game developers, you can actually use their cloud hosting service and store your or your users' data in their cloud service. That's pretty cool. Oh, and there's more. If you guys like Minecraft, you can do Minecraft servers. So head on over to Hostinger, click the link in the description for 15% off, and go ahead and get started. Support Hostinger because they support our wonderful relationship. Alright, so the first thing I do is I start out with 1020 by 1020, and I'm just going to Google an image of Breath of the Wild. This one's really cool with Thomas the Tank Engine and Link. And I'm just going to blur it, and it's going to give you a nice sort of gradient of the kind of colors that you see in Breath of the Wild. Then I'm just going to find an image of Link. In this case, it's an action figure, but I figured it was a good sort of straight-on shot of Link. So hell, we're just going to use that. And we're basically going to show you, I want to show you here, if I zoom out, you can actually see it's not going to look great as a 2D game. It looks great in 3D, but 2D, not so much. So what we're going to do is use really basic shapes. I'm going to start out with a generic circle here, and I kind of had trouble getting the right color, which is not starting off great here, but that's okay. We start out with a generic circle here, and I'm just going to create an oval shape for the chin, cut it in half, and then flip it, and then delete the top portion, and that's going to give us a nice sort of lemon-shaped chin, and now we have a really simplistic shape of Link's face. So far, so good. And as you'll notice as we work through this illustration, even though we're not in Adobe Illustrator and doing vector art, I kind of treat it like it is vector art. There's a lot of basic shapes involved. Anytime something is sort of behind, I'll do a gradient, and anytime I need a specific shape, I'll use the pen tool, get a nice rounded shape, especially here towards the collarbone, and then I'll typically always sort of flip it and mirror the character as we're moving along. So you'll see that we're creating this character not in the pose that Link is currently in as the action figure. Rather, we're actually going to be creating him in what's called T-pose. And T-pose is great for anytime you want to rig a character. Obviously, T-pose, you can use it in 3D or 2D. And T-pose is basically putting your character in a T shape. It's kind of like that Leonardo da Vinci image of the character sort of spreading his legs and his arms to give you a better idea of what he's going to look like so that you can rig him later. So right now I just took a rectangle, a blue rectangle with some rounded corners, and that's just using the shape tool. And now I'm cutting it into pieces and making it look kind of like what Link's shirt is. Again, you'll notice that I'm mirroring one side. So I usually don't worry about the right side. I'll just get the left side done of whatever object I'm working on, in this case a shirt. And then I'll just flip it. Now in this case, you'll notice that I'm getting a nice shape. Typically your character, you want him to have an A shape. If you take a look at Link on the left side, he's got an A shape. From the left shoulder all the way down to his foot, it's basically a straight line. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm getting an A shape out of Link. Now, I know it looks like he's not wearing pants, but that's okay. We'll get to that in just a second here. But I'm trying to get an idea of what he's actually going to look like underneath. I didn't want to draw him naked for obvious reasons, but I'm trying to get an idea of what he's looking like, and that's what I use this tool here to get an idea of this, what is it, the straight polygon lasso tool. It gives me an idea of what he looks like. So now we're moving on to his arms, and you'll see I'm just flipping and reflecting his arms from left to right. And you'll notice me zooming out a lot. Zooming out is your best friend when it comes to 2D character art. And it's the same principle with like creating logos. You want to make sure that your character looks really, really great from small distances. And also you want him to look great when the camera's zoomed in. But mainly your character is going to be much smaller than an actual 3D game on screen. And that's just typically the way my 2D games work. So anyway, moving on, we're going to be working on the boots here. I didn't want to get too specific with my boots. In fact, for my characters, I tend to have a very simplistic way of doing feet. They're very sharp and pointy, almost like Wind Waker. But earlier you just saw me really quickly Googling the Legend of Zelda 2, and you'll notice that Legend of Zelda 2 Link is basically facing perfectly to the right. Whereas in a lot of 2D games, what's actually happening, and I'm creating that here as well, the character is actually facing forward in 2D games, and then they're sort of just pivoted to the left or right, depending on the direction that the player is moving. So I'll show you how that's going to look at the very end. Even though we're at a perfectly straight angle here, you can actually make it look like they're facing a certain direction. Okay, finally, Link has his little kilt here. It doesn't look like he's pantless, so that's always good. And I'm just finishing up his little skirt or kilt. Excuse me. So moving those boots up, just stretching and scaling and cutting. And as you guys can see, I'm approaching this illustration a lot like I'm an architect, using basic shapes and scaling and cutting and using the selection tool to fill in certain areas or cut away certain areas, almost like I'm chiseling away at something. The alternative is to do something like a sketch. The problem with doing a sketch in something like a 2D game is your sketch can look amazing from far away, but I'm sorry, from close up, but from far away, your sketch can look terrible, especially in a 2D game. So you want to make sure, again, that your character looks great from far away. And I found that the easiest way to do that is to make sure you're designing with simple shapes first to get an abstract look of what your character is actually going to look like. In this case, we're actually working on the hands. You can see they're just two simple circles, right? I didn't get too complicated because, quite frankly, the hands are going to be basically 5 pixels wide when we're playing. If we ever created a 2D version of Zelda, like a 2D side-scroller version of Zelda, the hands would be absolutely tiny. So I'm going to go ahead and steal a Master Sword image. I like that one. And we're going to put it straight up, and we're going to cut out the handle here and get the color correctly. And I'm just going to make it look like it's sort of in my hand. And we'll just work on ensuring that the Master Sword is not necessarily as detailed as the 3D version, but we're going to get the generic principles out of it. And you know, when I'm working on this kind of stuff, I often think I'm kind of like one of those street artists you see at theme parks or whatever, where they do caricatures caricatures of tourists. Basically, it's similar with 2D art. You're creating a caricature of something that's 3D. And what a caricature basically is, overall, I guess fundamentally, it's taking the things that make you you and emphasizing those things, and really forgetting about the things that don't really have much to do with you. So you can see I'm taking all of the important things, the things that make the Breath of the Wild version of Link look like Link, and I'm putting them in this illustration. And that's really important because, guys, again, he's going to be small. He's going to be tiny on the screen. There's no reason to waste our time on small details in our illustration when in reality, the player's not going to be able to notice them anyway. And in fact, if you add small details to your character design, it's actually going to distract them from the things that make your character look like Link. So adding too much detail can be a huge distraction. So here we are just using the shape tool and also the selection tool to try and just cut away at various pieces of this sword and dragging and ensuring there we're using a perspective tool actually to make these little flourishes in the sword. And I felt like I needed to add this detail because this little detail is especially something that makes the Master Sword look like the Master Sword. So as you can see, we've finished up the Master Sword. It looks pretty much like the Master Sword from far away. I'm just adding an inner stroke here. It's just an effect you can add to a layer. And I'm going to decrease the size of it, and it's going to give it that blade, that sharp look on the edges. So far, so good. You'll notice we haven't added any shading yet. It's just flat colors. We're adding the shield here. Obviously, guys, we need a front-facing shield and a backwards-facing shield, and flip between those in the actual animation. But in this case, I'm just going to show you what it looks like facing backwards. I didn't want to spend too much time on the shield. Finally, we can get to the point where it looks like he's actually wearing pants, which is always a good thing. Link is now wearing pants, and you notice that actually the original Zelda games, it looked like he was wearing tights, but in this case, he's wearing khaki pants, which is really nice. So we're going to just create this sort of ruffled look here. It's just some simple polygon shapes. Duplicate it, mirror it, add a little bit of shading here just to get an idea of what it looks like. I usually do my shading at the very end of my 2D illustrations, but sometimes I'll add it in just to make sure that I'm telling my mind where things are on the z-axis of the character. And it's not an actual z-axis, it's just a z-axis in my head because 2D doesn't really have a z-axis. So we finished up the pants. We're not going to really worry about too many of those flourishes and details on Link's shirt. As cool as those white flourishes and threading are, I'm not going to worry about them. I'd much rather worry about this strap here because that's like Link's, one of Link's key features is that 45-degree angle strap across his chest. So I think now we can finally work on his face. And because we're creating a more simplistic Link, I'm going to actually reference the Wind Waker eyes. And even though I kind of figured out how to do the eyes here, and it's just basically creating circles and then cutting pieces of circles out of the circle and then doing some distortion, you'll notice that I did a pretty good job of replicating the Wind Waker eye here. But in the end, it just didn't actually work with the style. But I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about how I did the eye here. So the top is a thicker, sort of circular crescent shape. The bottom one is much thinner. So I'm just sort of making it really thin here and dragging it down, scaling it down. And we're going to get a Wind Waker looking eye here in just a bit. And then filling in that eye with some white. And I actually really learned something while doing this. Wind Waker achieved Link's blue eyes while also remaining very simplistic by adding a blue gradient on top of a black eye. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. You're getting that simplicity, but you're also saying, hey, Link's got blue eyes. So overall, it looks pretty good. I wasn't super happy with how it looked, but I decided I was going to just move forward. And now we're going to move on to the shape of the nose. You'll notice that we have a sort of Rembrandt lighting, which is basically you have a triangle shape at the cheek. Now in this case, it's not necessarily Rembrandt. It's kind of got more of a butterfly lighting effect, but we're just going to add sort of an overlay effect. You have black on the right side and then white on the left side, and then you apply a soft filter or an overlay blending filter to it. And then you just sort of gradient out the edges and you get this 3D looking nose. Now, the mouth is probably the easiest part of doing a 2D illustration. Honestly, just simply because, you don't really need to worry about it too much because it's so small. So I just did a little rectangle for the mouth. Now I'm centering everything up, finishing up the face. Now, the hardest part of pretty much any character is the hair, especially Link. Whereas something like these ears, you can just get them done really quickly. Just draw a triangle, add a gradient to them, duplicate them, put them behind his head. But the hair is where it gets really challenging. I find that if you're going to be working on hair, it's easy to do a really basic shape of the hair, almost as if he was like, I don't know, Don Draper with like a 1950s hairstyle. And then once you finish that, then you can actually go ahead and add all of the various big chunks of pieces like Goku hair towards the foreground, or on his forehead, I mean. So here we are making him look like Don Draper, apparently. He looks like a pretty boy. That's okay. We're going to keep... or we're going to move forward with these big chunks of pieces here to give it more of a messy look, or I guess an anime look, to add these pieces of hair coming in front of his eyes. So pretty cool. And I found that just adding a little bit of shade, just a tiny little shade with the brush of white and black, and then putting an overlay filter on top of it, or in this case it's a soft light filter, really works. So I'm just rotating and duplicating and trying to get an idea of what it looks like. Now you notice me in this portion of the illustration, I will be zooming in and out often. And the reason why is because we're getting pretty detailed here. And the reason why we're getting detailed is, again, details you typically want to avoid. You don't want to get too detailed with a 2D illustration, but you also want to be adding key features. Well, this is definitely a key feature for Link. The hair coming across his eyes, the blonde, sort of leaf-shaped hair coming across the eyes. So I definitely didn't want to forget about this part. As much as I was tempted to just forget about it, I knew how important it was to get Link to have this long hair. So it was a lot of guessing and checking and going back and forth, trying to figure out how to make it look. It wasn't easy, but I think the most important thing I learned about Link, especially the Breath of the Wild version, is he has pretty much one thick hair coming straight down, pointed at his nose, which I thought would look strange, but it actually ended up looking a lot better than my previous attempts. So I ended up using 3 on the left and then 1 on the right, and it's not perfect, I'll admit, but this was an illustration done in like 50 minutes. So I wasn't going to focus too much on getting it perfect. And you'll notice that it's kind of not amazing. But you never need to worry while you're doing an illustration, honestly. Just go for it and keep going, because things don't look perfect as you're creating them, obviously. So if things don't look perfect, don't worry about it. You can go in and start adding shading and tweaking things later, and you'll notice that even though we don't end up with a perfect design for Link, it definitely gets pretty good. And you notice here I'm tweaking the eyes even. I felt like the eyes just didn't look good, and so I felt like I was going to try out a different version of eyes. I definitely don't want to go with the typical Thomas Brush style eyes of just button eyes. I wanted to try something a little bit different and challenge myself. So what I did here was simply made the eyes a little bit white, and we're about to do that in just a second. But right here, what you'll notice is I'm adding shading to give the hair a little bit of depth. So I'm putting shading on the face and a gradient on the face to make the hair look like it's elevating away from the face. I'm a big fan of using the gradient tool to create shading. It creates a very soft, smooth, matte look for your characters, and I really like that. So you can see I'm adding shading to everything now. Once I finish up the generic geometry of my shapes, the very basic, essentially vector art, then I'll start just adding in the shading, and I always keep in mind where the light source is coming from. So in this case, generally speaking, the light source is coming from the top left corner. Imagine the sun is at like 3 o'clock, depending on where you're looking. So it's coming at an angle towards Link's head, And so I'm adding shading based on where that sun is. Sometimes I'll add shading on both sides of an object, even though it's not technically true. So you'll see I have shading on this side, and then I'll also put shading on the left side because it just, for some reason, didn't feel great. And then I decrease the opacity. I'm gonna add shading to the lips of these boots to make things feel a little bit more alive. And then I'm gonna go back to the eyes because they're still driving me crazy, and that's okay. That's the thing about eyes, guys. You want to make sure your eyes are perfect. Eyes are what make us feel something when we look at a character. So you really want to make sure the eyes are perfect. Now, admittedly, the eyes don't end up perfect in this video. They're just not going to, because I did this in, again, less than an hour. But overall, he kind of looks crazy, doesn't he? So I'm going to try and add a little bit of a cut to his eyes to make it look like cheeks. So there we go. He looks a little bit happier now, a little bit more cartoony and friendly. I like that. Not bad. So now the most exciting portion, and that is sarcasm. The most exciting portion of working on your illustration is just combining things and merging things, because I don't know if you noticed, but I was just creating layer after layer after layer after layer. It was kind of a mess. And so I'm merging things together now and renaming things and converting things to smart objects. But for the most part, I pretty much rasterize everything when I feel comfortable with it. I even increased the size of his head because it felt a little bit small. And the whole time I was working on the illustration, I knew his head was too small, but I figured I'd just do it in the end. And so his head is a little bit bigger now. You can see me dragging things around, and what I'm actually doing is I'm just selecting things. And in order for me to know that I've selected a certain amount of objects, I'll just drag it around. And if I can drag a certain amount of objects around, I know what I've selected. And which is kind of a silly way to select things, to be honest, but that's how I do it. And I'm just merging things together. So I have his shirt as one object, I have his arm as one object, his bicep as another object, so that I can actually animate these things in Unity. Now, the shield and his hand and his forearm on the right side are all one giant rasterized object. But on the left side, I want his sword to be able to swing and move. So the sword is a separate object, and his left forearm, or if he was looking at us. Sorry, my dog is itching. Hey, Jebby. Hey, Jebby. I'm recording, buddy. I love you, but I'm recording. But yeah, so you got to sort of figure out what you're going to want to animate, and then cut things based on what you're going to want to animate. So his feet and his calves are all one object, so you can see me merging these together. So we have a right thigh, a right foot, or / right leg, left thigh. And now I'm just naming things. It's really important to name things because it can get really complicated, especially if you guys are making a little bit more complicated character. You really want to make sure that you're naming things appropriately. So I'm not going to animate this character in this video. That's for another video, but it's surprisingly easy to do in Unity. But what I'm going to do is just sort of show you guys how I'm going to position the character in Unity, but I'm just going to do that in Photoshop. Typically, you're going to want to save your character as a PSB, not a PSD, a PSB. In this case, I saved it as a PSD, but if you're going to import it into Unity, save it as a PSB. So this is me questioning whether I'm actually going to show you how to animate it, and then I realized, you know what? I can just capitalize on another video. So there will be a video eventually about me animating, but this is just me showing you this is what he would look like now rotated. So see, we've got a 2D character, and you can imagine him running left and right, flipping back and forth, flipping to the right and flipping to the left. Looks pretty good. I mean, it's not perfect, right? But I thought it kind of looks pretty cool. If you guys enjoyed this video, this is the outro, Caleb, by the way. So what'd you think? Pretty cool, right? I thought it was really fun taking a 3D character like Link and making him into a 2D character. Guys, keep practicing. You can do it. You can make amazing 2D art. If you guys like this video, please click the link in the description and support on Patreon, or just subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. I'll try and answer if I can. I love you so much. This was really fun. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. What am I doing? I think I'm running out of ideas about what to say, so I think I might just end this video now. Should I?
should I?